Hello everyone, and welcome to the camera manual for this, the Intrepid 8x10 Mark II. This is actually kind of more like a Mark II.5 because I ordered it right at the end of the Mark II production run, and there's a couple of things on here that are like look like they're taken from the Mark III. It was, I think this was probably one of the last of the Mark IIs produced just based on when I ordered it and when the Mark III came out 2 weeks after I got this camera. We're going to start off by opening this up. The Intrepid 8x10 Mark II is an 8x10 format field camera. 8x10 is the size of the negative in inches. It's the size of this black area right here. So very, very large negatives. To open it, you simply unscrew on each side the two screws, the one for the standard guide rail and the one for the base tilt. This camera has no light meter built into it. Very simple. Camera, you will have to use your own light meter to get light meter readings. Shutter speeds will vary based on the type of shutter that you have. Then the flash sync on your shutters will vary based on the shutter that you have. In general, this camera will use leaf shutters. There are some exceptions we're going to talk about in this video. And in general, leaf shutters allow you to use a flash sync at every shutter speed. The Mark II is a suitable, though flawed, camera, and we're going to cover some of the weaknesses it has in just a moment. We're going to do that right up front. And then we're also going to go through some of the updates that this from the Mark II to the Mark III. I'll also show you a couple of things in this that are, I think, specific to the Mark III, but that appear on my camera. The first flaw that I have for this is that the top clips are fragile. Let me show you what those are. So up here on the top, sorry for the shaky cam, these top clips are used to hold the back of the camera in place. We'll see that in a little bit. And if you notice, these are 3D printed. And if you see right here, those 3D printing lines are horizontal along this hinge. I've busted 6 of these hinges now, right here. Exact same place for all of them as this, these printing lines just snap. So I'm not going to pull any punches here. That's bad engineering and not a good design. It should have been made differently. And fortunately, the Mark III version of this camera does away with those clips, does not have them. Okay. So as of this video's recording in September 2024, Intrepid currently has a few of these clips left. I don't know how much longer that's going to be the case. I emailed Intrepid to order some more of those clips because they keep breaking on me, and their email back indicated they had a few. It sounded like from their email that those clips are out of production. I do hope Intrepid does the right thing and make the 3D printing files available so that people who have 3D printers or somebody online who sells 3D printed parts could make them. Because if those parts become unavailable, it's going to be really hard to use this camera really well. A couple of options you might have if your clips break. One of them, binder clips might work. If you can get them on here correctly. The other thing I had thought of is that if you keep the clip after it breaks, you could probably glue it back together or take a metal strip, make a loop with a needle nose pliers and glue it to the clip and make something that you could use to limp along with. The second flaw that the camera has, in a very similar vein, is that on the bottom, you might notice these blue clips here. Those are black when these came from the factory. I have blue bellows, so when these broke, I replaced them with blue. These also break quite a bit. In fact, the few of these I've seen online that are being sold used almost have these often being broken. These you can get third-party 3D printed on eBay from, I got these from Bit by Bit Photo, and they've worked actually ridiculously well. They're fantastic. So those are my two major flaws with the Mark II, and two things that really should have been engineered differently from the very start. On the Mark III, I looked at the upgrades from the Mark II to see what they are. The first one is that the Mark III does away with both clip sets. There's an entirely different interface on the back of the camera for how the backs mount. It is not backwards compatible with the Mark II, but it does look like it is significantly better in terms of engineering quality. I have not gotten my Mark III yet. I will be ordering one soon. The second upgrade is at the shift and zeroing marks. So on the front of this camera here, we have the front standard right here, okay? This plain black plastic is typical. On the Mark III, there are zeroing marks and shift marks to indicate how much shift you've had that look like they're stenciled on to the camera, to the base plate, so that you have a better ability to make sure that you don't accidentally have some swing in your optical system, and also to give you an idea of how much you are off center and how to recenter your image. So that upgrade is significant because it gives you the ability to have better images where the lens is better aligned or correctly aligned if you're using movements with your film. The third upgrade is that there are better front standard knobs, and I believe that these are those front standard knobs, the ones on my camera here. They're more robust than the ones that are from the Mark II, and if you know the Mark II of this and also the Mark IV 4x5 and earlier versions, the front standard knobs are notorious for getting stripped, and then you no longer have the ability to lock your tilt. So that's a hair frustrating. These are better. I've had no issues with these stripping or becoming weak at all. They've been fantastic. The fourth upgrade is that there's a different lens board retaining clip. On this one, it might be a little hard to see given how far away the camera's got to be for this video, but this has a couple of little prongs up here that are bent forward at an angle, okay? And these are really easy to grip and slide up and down. The new one just has a single loop. It's straight. There's no bending in it, no articulated shape. And it looks like it's just a whole lot easier to make. Whether it's easier or not to use, I couldn't tell you. It looks fine. I don't think that's a major difference in terms of usability. I do happen, by the way, to like the aesthetic look of this part on the Mark III a whole lot better. The next upgrade is that there are grooves on the front focusing plate that allow for proper alignment of the front standard. So if you take a look at the front focusing base right here, on mine you're going to notice some lines that I've drawn in with a right angle marker to make sure that they were properly aligned. This is just smooth. On the Mark III, there are grooves here to help with proper alignment of the front standard, and I have indications here of the focal length of the lenses that I use, so if you wanted to calculate that, you can. Those marks are useless to me now because I made a modification on this camera, which we'll talk about later, that allows it to focus closer to the rear standard than it was designed to. The sixth one is the felted lens board mount. Should not have turned that back so quickly. All right, here we go. You can see that this has felt on it. On the other Mark IIs I've seen, they do not have felt. But this one showed up with felt, which makes me suspect that it is actually a Mark III lens board. I do like this lens board and the felted design way better, especially since all of my lens boards are third party. That felted design does a good job of helping prevent glare and light from getting past the lens board onto the film and messing up my images. There are some things I would do differently with this front standard. So let's talk about some improvements that, now when I talked to Intrepid, they did say that they were in development of an 8x10 Mark IV, and they specified it was for a distant future release. They didn't give me a timeline, but for the distant was their exact word, future. So I would not hold off on buying a Mark III if you're looking at it. I'm not holding off on buying a Mark III anyway. So some improvements that Intrepid should make for the Mark IV. The focusing knob, here it is on the back of these cameras, is incredibly hard to turn. Because of the way, let me see if I can get, dang it. Let me see if I can get a better view of the focusing knob here for you. You can see probably that this is right there underneath the rear standard. And when you go to focus it, you really got to get your hand in there to focus it. It's not exactly the easiest thing. You can probably see that my fingers are I can't even really fit my fingers between the focusing knob and the rear standard, the bottom of it. So it might not be a perfect solution, but the way I would experiment with fixing that would be making this focus knob longer so that it sticks out of the back further and it's just easier to turn. That is a huge challenge for me when I'm out in the field using this. Also, the Mark IV of the Mark V rather, or the 4x5s has a removable bellows. It would be really nice if the Mark IV of these came with a removable bellows and a bag bellows option. I know you get pretty close on the rear focusing here, and I have not so far had tons of issues using my ultra wide angle lenses on this camera. It does seem to do better at that than the 4x5 version of this camera in terms of shooting landscapes and architecture. But I don't get any movements with my ultra wides, so a bag bellows would allow me to get some movements because some of my ultra wides will cover 10x12 or 11x14, and it would be nice to be able to get a little bit more control out of the image there. I think one of them covers 11x14. Anyway, I would also like on the front standard a larger opening on it. So Intrepid, if you're watching this, a larger opening here would be lovely. This is the smallest size Packard shutter, and it will fit in here just fine. In fact, here's a lens that has the smallest size Packard shutter mounted on it. This is an old Schneider Dacicar, and if I mount it, I can mount it just fine, no issue. I can mount it just fine, no issue. There we go. And you can see it's mounted. I can use the Packard shutter on this lens. The lens board size is large enough that I could theoretically, if this opening were large enough, mount the second smallest size Packard, which will actually fit in here, but is kind of fiddly when it's on a lens to get in here and angled up. So that's a little bit challenging, but this will actually fit in. The third size Packard shutter will not. It's not big enough. If this opening here were squared off and a bit bigger, I could use this and have more barrel lens options. I think that would be a really nice thing to have. Would be more Packard shutter available options with the Mark IV. So those are the upgrades I'd like to see. One other upgrade, of course, since I wrote the focusing lengths out here, or the lens focal lengths on the board, it'd be nice just to have a range of focal lengths that work on, engraved or printed onto these. One upgrade I did on this camera is on the back of, it's going to be really hard to see with this angle, I apologize, but on the back of the focusing knob here, between the focusing board and the focusing knob, there was like probably about a 25 millimeter long plastic sleeve over the focusing screw. And that limited how close the rear standard could get to this point. This is the as out of factory closest focus point. I cut that sleeve off, and now I can get the focus a whole lot closer than I could before, which is really nice when I'm using a 150 millimeter lens on this camera. 150 to 180 millimeter lenses really benefit from that. For the Intrepid 8x10 model history, or target market, it's an entry-level camera by 8x10 standards. Like as I'm filming this video today, the Intrepid 8x10 Mark III sells for $616 US. By 8x10 standards, this is an entry-level camera. You can get an old used 8x10 camera for $5,000 if you would like to do that, or probably more. I think there are some that go for $10,000 to $30,000. So in the scale of what you could pay for an 8x10, this is a very affordable option. 616 bucks as I record this is a steal for an 8x10 camera. So, oh, one other change, I forgot, the bubble levels on the Mark III are built into the standard. I believe they're not. I think they're on plastic shoes on the Mark II, and this one has them in the standard. Anyway, off track. To keep this at $616, it does seem like there are some corners that are cut in some of the build things. Like, I shouldn't say corners. Some of the design things are designed to be affordable. The build quality on this is really good. This is an incredibly rigid camera, and I've never had any issues with lenses shifting around when I use it. But it does use 3D printed components. The knobs are always one that rightfully get harped on a little bit. The base here, I think it's fine as a 3D printed component, though honestly, I would probably just CNC it out of a piece of wood, but whatever, it works. And then also it uses the screw-in style of expanding the base instead of using a more refined, permanently attached base with more articulation. This is easier to engineer, build, and use. So there's those things which are, you know, it's still a very fun camera to use. I love using this camera. Okay, it was made by Intrepid Camera in East Sussex, United Kingdom. If you have or are interested in learning more about the features and layout of your Intrepid 8x10 Mark II, we're going to start on the back of the camera here. We're going to talk about what the different things are. So up here we have that's great camera work, David. All right, so up here we have the rear retaining clips. These clips flip up so that you can remove the back of the camera to rotate from landscape to portrait orientation. Here is the film holder area. This is the focusing screen. These arms put tension on this to keep it properly aligned and to keep your film holders sandwiched in place. And then here we have the rear clips that keep the back of the camera properly aligned. To remove the back, all you have to do is lift these up, and then you put there's a couple of way over here on this side, there are a couple of flanges, lips, overhangs, something you want to call them, built into, here it is, the shape of the 8x10 back rather. And you just got to find them. I thought I found it, and pry them off. Just gotta, this is easier when I'm behind the camera. Okay, here's one. Up here, just going to pry it off like this. And you want to be very gentle with how much you tilt it. The way that these clips down here break is tilting this back too far and just snapping the clips off. So I'm going to tilt it back a little bit just to break the magnetic connection and free the plywood lip here from the recess here. And now to change this to portrait orientation, I slide it into these clips, click it into place, and now we've gone to portrait. Put the top clips back down, and we're set. Here on the side, we have the locking knobs for the standard, which allow you to adjust the tilt of the standard, and also when you are ready to put it away, to close it and secure it into place. Here on the back also, we have the focusing knob. The further out you move your lens from the film, the closer the focus point gets. So this allows you to move your lens forward or backward if you overshoot. Okay, this is the front standard here. We have these focusing knobs right here. These inside, so there's an inside one, an inside set, and then an outside set. The inside set allow you to control rise and fall. Might work better if I don't bind up the bellows. Control rise and fall, there we go, okay. The outside ones allow you to control your tilt right here, okay. You've got bubble levels on top here and here to verify whether or not you're level. I'm a hair off right now. Then down here on the front standard, we have our removal and swing control. So you can loosen it, and now you can swing the front standard around for movement control. And you can also completely unscrew this, lift this thing up, and then collapse it or move it forward if you need to do that. On the focusing base right here, we have the tripod, or the quarter 20 sockets, I think it's quarter 20, that are receptacles for the screw right here, so that you can put this into different preset positions. There are plenty of preset positions. I don't think there's a need for there to be more or anything like this. I think it's pretty much perfect. With many of my lenses, it starts a little bit beyond infinity, and then I can just focus closer, no big deal, super easy. So there's a lot of the things in here that are really ridiculously well thought out and well designed. And though in general, when it comes to field camera use, I'm not a huge fan of this, like remove the standard thing. This is a camera I do really enjoy using quite a bit. Okay. Oh, and lastly, we have the bellows. I forgot to call that out. The bellows right here, big and blue. All right, now that we've seen what everything on the camera is, let's talk about how to start doing some of the stuff with it. We're going to start with mounting a lens. You saw me do the one earlier. I'm going to grab a different lens here, and I'm going to mount this on the camera. Okay. So this is my biggest, heaviest 8x10 lens, and this camera handles it just fine. Okay, you can see, not a small lens. So to mount the lens, you lift up on the clip right here, tilt the base of the lens board in, hold it, let it rest in place, push this down, make sure that it's perfectly secured, and you've mounted your lens board. Super simple, okay. Volute shutters, really old, you probably don't want to, I'm not going to go over exactly how to use these. They are my favorite kind of shutter. Volutes are lovely. So with your lens, what you want to do after you mount, before you mount your lens, is you want to understand the interface of your specific shutter. Copal, Comper, Volute, Packard. There are Luke, L-U-C, or Luck, however it's pronounced, is another type of very simple shutter like the Packards. There are lots and lots of different types of shutters. So understand how your shutter works before you go out in the field, so that you can just do everything from behind the camera without fiddling around with the interface if you can, okay? So you want to understand your shutter. Next thing we're going to talk about is how to load film. Now, this is a 100-year-old 8x10 film holder. Most of the time they're plastic. This one is wood. Most of mine are actually this type of holder. Happen to really like these. What you do is you would load your 8x10 sheet beforehand, okay? And I have live 8x10 sheets in here. They're $18 a sheet. I'm not going to open up the dark slide. But you would load it in here. You can see I have masking tape up here. Here's an image I'm going to put over the screen that shows you how I use the masking tape for data recording. Basically, all my sheet film holders are numbered. And I'll write the number in the top left corner, and then below it, when I load the film, I'll write the type of film that's in it. Then as I actually take the photo, before I take the photo, I'll write the date of the exposure so that I can keep things organized. I'll write the subject, so I know what I'm taking a photo of. I'll put either a P or an L inside of parentheses. That's my note to my future self, whether it's a portrait or a landscape-oriented photo. It makes it much easier to get these into the negative sleeves after they're dried and ready to be put into the sleeves. I'll put the camera, even though I only have one 8x10, it's just habit to put the camera down. The lens, so that I know that the lens is working properly. The aperture and the shutter speed, so I can check my exposure information in the future. And then if I have any significant rise, fall, tilt, shift, swing, whatever, I'll mark that, or filters if I use a filter. So in the future, I can figure out what I did if the photo turns out well or if it turns out terribly. I'll also leave space to write down the developer type, concentration, and time, so that I can see if the developer is working correctly, or if it's too strong or too long or too short, whatever, with the film. When you are shooting sheet film, no matter the format, it's expensive. These sheets were $18 each. This is almost $40 worth of film in this one holder. So if you make a mistake or have a problem with your gear, it's an expensive mistake. It's important to communicate with yourself in the future as though your future self is a stranger who has no idea what you are doing. One last thing I forgot to mention with these, when you number them, when you get your film back, you can see if there's a light leak. And if you load your film the exact same way with the notch down here or up here, those are the two ways to load it correctly, then when you get your negatives back, if there is a light leak, you know which holder it was and exactly where that light leak occurred. So this is not one of the ones I had to repair, but I have had to repair some of my film holders for light leaks. So 100-year-old film holders, it happens. Anyway, so plenty of tips about using film there. I'm going to bring the back of the camera around here, and I'm going to show you how to load the film. So after you have focused your photo, you know what you want to take, you close the shutter again to prevent light from getting to the back of the camera, and then you tilt the back of this open, slide your film holder into the back of the camera. It clicks into place. If you want to make sure that it is loaded properly, what you do is you look on the underside, and you can see here the bottom of the film holder is pressed up against the bottom of the film area. If you can see that, then you know that you have properly placed your film. There's no light leak along the bottom, so that's all really good. Then when you go to actually take the photo, you lift the dark slide out of your camera. You take your photo, you put the dark slide back in. So to remove your film holder from the camera, I'm going to show you how I do this, okay? You put your dark slide back in, you're ready to remove this. I will pull this back slightly with my thumb and push from the bottom, okay? Kind of hard to see, but push from the bottom like this. Now what that does is, because I have pulled this back from the camera, there's a little ridge inside of on the film holder that engages with a groove inside of the receptacle on the back here. I pull this back so that it's not holding in place anymore. I push up, that ejects it enough that I can now lift it and gently remove it from the back of the camera. There we go. And here you can see that ridge on this. This is what locks the film holder in place on the back of the camera. I will always record the information on my film holder before I take the photo, okay? Write it down on the masking tape. You're generally speaking not like rushing to get a photo. You're not doing action photos with this. It's going to be landscapes, architecture, maybe portraits, right? Product shots, you could do that if you want to do product shots on film. You're going to have a slow workflow on this, so record the data on the masking tape before you take the photo. That way, one, you know which side of the film holder to put into the camera, and two, when you pull it out, you don't forget to record that and accidentally take a double exposure. There are ways. The dark slides have a black face and a silver face on the top of the thing, right? Sure, that's great. However, if you are writing down information about your photo, it's a foolproof way to not accidentally take a double exposure and to communicate with your future self what the image is and what you did when you took it, okay? So it's all these little steps of control for communication and prevention of mistakes. Next up, we're going to talk about how to take a photo with this camera, and there's going to be a hint of make-believe because I'm not putting the film holder and the lens back on. Okay, so when you go to take a picture, you're actually going to be behind the camera, okay? You're going to mount the lens if it's not already mounted. You're going to open it up so that you can focus the lens. You want to have the aperture wide open, and then you get the most precise focus you can. Really bright lenses like the one I had on here a few minutes ago, I can actually see the image on the ground glass without my dark hood, so I will rough compose that way and get it lined up. And if I'm in the shade, I actually don't even need a hood, dark cloth for that lens. But most of the time with 8x10 especially, you will need a dark cloth. So this is one that I made myself, definitely does not look that way. Very professional looking dark cloth. So what you do is you will be behind looking at the ground glass, and you're going to focus your lens, and as you get closer to focusing, you'll compose and rough focus this way, okay? Unless your eyes are amazing, you will compose and rough focus. Come on, this is going so well. This way. Then you will grab something like this loop right here, okay? And then you'll hold it onto the ground glass. That was right in my ear. While you are underneath the dark cloth, you'll put this up to the ground glass, and you'll have your eye up to your focusing loop. And then you'll use this to find the most critical part of your photo, your portrait subject's eye, or the entrance to the building you're taking a photo of, or whatever, right? And then you find what you want to have be in the most precise focus. You focus to that being in the most precise focus. And now you know that you are going to have focus. The front standard on this is pretty good. I've not had any issues with the focusing bed right here moving in and out. So, you know, this is not something that you need to have like a lock here. It's got enough resistance that it doesn't really move, which is really nice. It's an absolutely lovely design, this focusing bed. Okay, so you've obtained focus. Then you're going to shut your shutter so that you can take your photo, load your film, remove the dark slide. Of course, you've already recorded your data on the masking tape. Trigger the shutter without your hand being in front of the lens. Put the dark slide back in, remove your film. There you go. That's the process of taking a single exposure rather. And now I have given you a spoiler as to what we're going to talk about next. So, single exposure, pretty simple, right? Light meter reading, dial in the settings on your lens, put in the film, take it. What about double exposures? Double exposures are super simple, okay? All you have to do is trigger your lens twice. That's the mechanical aspect of a double exposure. Large format cameras are double exposure machines. It takes nothing whatsoever if you were to take two double exposures right at the same time to do it other than triggering your lens twice. There are tons of creative things you can do with a double exposure. Take a photo outside, move your camera inside, take a second photo on the same piece of film, whatever. Take a photo that's in infinity, put the dark slide back in, remove it, recompose with something that's really up close. You can now superimpose like that. Rotating back, have one photo, one image like landscape, like this, turn it 180 degrees. You have the second image, it's a landscape, it's a mirror image, things like that. Lots of cool creative stuff you can do with large format for double exposures. That's all the mechanics of it. The science of it's a little bit more complicated. Now, film is designed to receive a certain number of photons, and if it receives too many, it's going to be what's called thick, dense, or dark. They're three words, they mean the exact same thing. Your film had too much light reach it. It will physically look very dark. And if you have an enlarger-based workflow or a contact print workflow for 8x10, what's going to happen is you're going to have very long print times and low contrast. Your print times will be made even longer because you'll need to use contrast enhancing filters, which increase print times in the darkroom. That's to prevent low contrast from your very thick negative. In digital work, you will have low contrast and high digital noise if you're using a flatbed or probably a drum scanner. If you're using a digital camera to digitize these, you don't have the issues with digital noise to the same extent because you can get a longer exposure, and that can mitigate a lot of the digital noise that happens from having underexposed photos or scans of your thick negative. That digital noise and that low contrast come from the amount of light passing through the negative being less and more uniform. So if you imagine a negative that's got like a clear area over here for a very bright circle and a dark area over here that's got a very dark circle, and when you make that into the print, you're going to have a very bright light where the dark area of the negative blocked the light coming from the enlarger, and you're going to have a very dark area where the photo paper absorbed way more photons from that clear area, okay? Really basic explanation of how you get a positive print from a negative. So when that whole negative is a uniform dark color, it takes more light reaching the negative, but there's less gradation in tone in the negative, so you get lower contrast and you get more digital noise because if you have the exact same amount of scan time as you would for a properly exposed negative, okay? So double exposure proper double exposure technique is important. And for that, if you assume that 1/100th of a second at f/16 is a proper exposure, one photo at that will turn out with a good negative. For a double exposure, you need to cut that in half. There are two ways to do it, with the shutter speed or the aperture. And with the aperture, with the shutter speed, it's easier to explain. All the shutter speed numbers are fractions. 1/100th of a second, 1/100 it's a fraction of a second. Half as much light is half as much time, which is 1/200th of a second. So if you wanted to keep your aperture at f/16 and go from 1/100th to 1/200th and do that twice, that gives you your double exposure with a proper amount of light reaching the film. If you are locked into a specific shutter speed for some reason, whether it's a limitation of your shutter or the shutter speed you want to use for a photo, you can then do that with the aperture. f/16 is a fraction as well. So you could go to f/22. That's one stop slower. One stop slower from f/16 is again 1/2 as much light. f/22 allows half as much light through the lens as f/16 does. So you have those two ways. You can choose one or the other, not both, to cut the amount of light in half for your double exposure. And then you go about it just like that, and you have taken your double exposure. So I do have some tips for you on how to make the most out of your Intrepid 8x10. Some of these, if not all of them, really will apply to every model of the 8x10. The first one is here on the bed. You can see, as I've talked about a couple of times, I have these marks that indicate the lenses I use with the front standard at these lines. These lines were made with a right angle marker. They were not made with the standard here. What I did was I would screw in the standard, and I'd tighten it. I'd use the right angle marker to get it nice and straight like that. I'd put a little mark at the very side of each of the points here going down, close this up, and then I used the right angle marker to draw straight lines across the bed. And then I hand wrote in the focal lengths of each lens that I use at each of these screw receptacles. So when I grab a lens, I know exactly which hole to put it in. I don't have to bother trying to remember that for this camera. This is something I would definitely do. If you're getting a camera, the Mark III or I would assume any future Intrepid that has the notches in the board, then what you could do is ignore the lines and just write the focal length of the lenses. To figure out which lens you want to use for each receptacle, what you want to do is put the lens into the receptacle and see if you can obtain infinity focus with it. Most of the time, the camera will focus beyond infinity at this receptacle. There are very few occasions where you put it in here, everything's zeroed out, and you're perfectly at infinity. So just assume you're going to focus beyond infinity, and that's why this is a range here. But figure out which one of these allows you to be as close to the back of the camera as possible to reach infinity, and that's how you know which hole to put your lenses in. The next thing is, you saw my lens boards. All my lens boards here, I order from eBay, from Tim at Bit by Bit Photo, and he has made 100% of my 8x10 Intrepid lens boards. They're fantastic, by the way, and also more affordable than getting them from Intrepid if you're in the US. If you're outside of the US, that probably changes just a little bit. But Intrepid, though I don't have any Intrepid lens boards of my own, I have heard that they are very good lens boards as well, but third-party options do exist. These are a little bit thick to laser cut, so I don't make my own on these. I have them made for me. Let's see. And lastly, the last tip I have for you is get small lenses for this camera where you can. This is a big camera. It's a lot to carry. Film holders for 8x10 are big and heavy. So a lot of my lenses for this are really small, backpacker friendly. In fact, this Goer's here is the biggest lens. Is it? Yeah, this is the biggest lens I have for this camera that is designed to be used on a field camera. So, yeah, then once you are done with taking your photo and everything, you want to be able to close this up. So to close it, what I do is I will lift the front standard as far as I can to give my hand room to unscrew the thread in the bottom of the camera. Once this is out, I will drop the front standard and push this up to the bottom of the front standard. Push this into the back of the camera, unlock, and close, and it's ready to go back in my backpack. So very small, very lightweight. This is not the lightest weight 8x10 camera ever made. I don't know what's lighter than it. Very rigid, absolutely wonderful piece of equipment. So cannot wait to get the Mark III and do a video about that as soon as I do. Thank you everybody for watching. Here are some other videos that you might find useful about large format photography, and I'll see you in whatever video comes next.